The emergency meeting started at 2 a.m. 6 studio executives sat around a table at Paramount. They'd been calling Warren Beatty's house for 3 hours. No answer. The problem wasn't that he'd disappeared. The problem was who he'd disappeared with. A senator's wife, a studio head's fiancée, and according to one reliable source, both on the same weekend, the head of publicity put his head in his hands. We need damage control. We need a statement. We need him to apologize. Someone needed to tell Warren Beatty how this worked, how Hollywood protected its stars by making them controllable, how you survived scandals by showing remorse. Beatty walked into the meeting at 3:17 a.m., hair perfect, suit unwrinkled. He sat down, looked at the 6 men, and said 5 words. What are we discussing exactly? No shame, no nervousness, no acknowledgement that anything had happened. One executive cleared his throat. Warren, we need to address the situation. Beatty leaned back in his chair. What situation? That's when they realized. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to explain. He wasn't going to play the game everyone else played. And somehow, that made him more powerful than any of them. If you understand why refusing to defend yourself can be more dangerous than any defense, you're in the right place. This isn't the Warren Beatty story Hollywood tells. Not the charming actor, not the ladies' man, not the romantic legend. This is about the version the industry couldn't control, the one who understood that real power doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain. It makes the accusation irrelevant by refusing to acknowledge it exists. Because in 1974, when Beatty walked into that emergency meeting, he didn't just refuse to show remorse. He refused to admit there was anything to be remorseful about, and in doing so, he made the entire system adjust to him. To understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand what Hollywood was in the 1970s. It wasn't just an entertainment industry. It was a morality police force. Studios controlled their stars through image management. One scandal could end a career. One affair could blacklist you. One angry husband with connections could make sure you never worked again. The system was simple. We'll make you famous, but we own your reputation. Step out of line, and we'll destroy you publicly. Apologize when we tell you to. Hide what we tell you to hide. Marry who makes sense. Divorce quietly. Every star knew this. Rock Hudson hid his entire identity. Cary Grant played the perfect gentleman. Even Marlon Brando, who fought studios on everything else, kept his personal life carefully managed. The price of fame was control. The price of control was obedience. Warren Beatty heard all of this. He understood the rules completely. And then he did something no one had done before. He made his reputation so dangerous that controlling it became impossible. Warren Beatty wasn't quieter than other stars. He was more visible. He didn't hide his affairs. He didn't sneak around. He didn't lie about who he was with or where he'd been. He just refused to treat it as anyone's business but his own. While other actors released statements denying affairs, Beatty said nothing. While others apologized to wronged spouses, Beatty remained silent. While others promised to change, to be better, to respect the sanctity of marriage, Beatty simply continued living exactly as he had before. He wasn't rebellious. Rebellion acknowledges the rule you're breaking. Beatty acted as if the rule didn't exist. When a prominent producer's wife left him for Beatty, the producer demanded a meeting. Studio heads expected Beatty to apologize, to smooth things over, to play the game. Beatty showed up 30 minutes late, listened to the producer's anger, waited until he finished, and said, "She made her choice." Then he left. No apology, no justification, No attempt to make the man feel better about being left. That's when Hollywood realized they weren't dealing with a controllable star anymore. Because what do you do with someone who won't pretend to be ashamed? The studio tried traditional tactics first. They threatened to leak stories. Beatty shrugged. The stories were already out there, and he'd never denied them. They threatened to cast him as a villain in the press. Beatty smiled. The public loved him more every time they tried. They threatened to stop offering him roles. Beatty had 3 other studios calling him that week. Every weapon they had was designed for someone who feared exposure, someone who needed their approval, someone who cared what people thought. Beatty didn't fear exposure. His entire reputation was built on it. He didn't need their approval. He had profit participation deals that made him richer than most executives. And he didn't care what people thought, because the people who mattered, the women, the directors, the audiences, already knew exactly who he was. The threats meant nothing, and when threats mean nothing, power shifts. 6 months after that 2 a.m. meeting, something changed in Hollywood, not officially. No announcement was made. No policy was written. But Warren Beatty stopped getting calls asking him to apologize, stopped getting lectures about protecting his image, stopped getting threatened with consequences. Because the industry realized something terrifying: consequences only work on people who fear them. Other actors started noticing. Younger stars started asking their agents, "Why do I have to hide this? Beatty doesn't." Studio executives started wondering if moral clauses in contracts were still enforceable. Nobody said Warren Beatty's name in those meetings, but everyone knew who had broken the system. Because power doesn't announce itself. It makes the room adjust without speaking. And here's what made Beatty truly dangerous. Here's what kept executives awake trying to understand how to manage him. No one could attack his work. You could call him a womanizer. The public already knew. You could call him arrogant. He'd smile and agree. You could call him immoral. He'd never claimed to be moral. But his films made money. His performances won awards. His projects succeeded. So what were they going to do? Fire their most profitable star because he slept with too many women? Blacklist someone the audience loved? Destroy someone whose films paid their salaries? They had no move, and Beatty knew it. So where did the power actually come from? Because it wasn't just about breaking rules. Plenty of actors broke rules and got destroyed. It came from 3 things the system couldn't touch. First, complete ownership of his reputation. Beatty never pretended to be something he wasn't. He never sold a false image. So when the truth came out, it wasn't a scandal. It was just confirmation of what everyone already knew. You can't destroy someone with the truth if they never lied about who they were. Second, separation of work and personal life. Beatty's affairs never affected his professionalism. He showed up on time. He knew his lines. He delivered performances. His personal chaos never touched his professional value. The studio couldn't say he was difficult to work with, because he wasn't. He just refused to let them control his personal life. Third, economic leverage. Beatty produced his own films. He had profit participation deals. He made studios money even when they hated dealing with him. And you can't blacklist someone who makes you rich. That's the combination the system had never faced before. Someone who was professionally invaluable and personally uncontrollable. You can control someone whose career depends on your approval. You can manage someone whose reputation is fragile. You can pressure someone who needs the work. But you can't control someone who's already decided that your approval is irrelevant. By 1976, Warren Beatty was operating under completely different rules, not because he fought for them, Not because he negotiated them, because the industry quietly stopped trying to apply the old rules to him. When gossip columns wrote about his affairs, studios stopped demanding responses. When wronged husbands called executives, they stopped calling Beatty. When moral guardians complained, publicity departments stopped issuing apologies on his behalf. The rules had changed, silently, invisibly, but completely. Directors noticed it first. When Beatty arrived on set, there was no tension from studio representatives, no warnings about behavior, no clauses about morality. He was treated like someone beyond those concerns, not because he'd earned it, because he'd made enforcement impossible. Producers noticed it second. When they pitched projects to Beatty, they didn't mention image protection or reputation management. They talked about the work. Just the work. Because they'd learned that talking about anything else was pointless. Other actors noticed it third, and they started wondering why they were still following rules that clearly didn't apply to everyone. That's when the system started breaking for everyone, because once one person proves the rules are optional, the rules stop being rules, they become suggestions. And here's the moment that defined him. The moment that showed he understood power better than anyone trying to control it. In 1978, a major studio offered Beatty a 10-picture deal, guaranteed financing, complete control. One condition, a standard morality clause. Nothing aggressive, just the industry standard. Conduct yourself in a manner that doesn't bring disrepute to the studio. Beatty read it, smiled, and said, "Remove that clause." The executive explained it was standard. Every contract had it. It meant nothing. Beatty's response was simple. Then removing it should be easy. They went back and forth for 20 minutes. The executive explaining why it had to stay, Beatty explaining why it had to go. Finally, the executive said, "Warren, we're offering you everything you want. Why fight over one standard clause?" Beatty leaned forward. "Because if it means nothing, you don't need it. And if it means something, I won't sign it." They removed the clause. Not because Beatty was difficult, because his logic was perfect. And because everyone in that room knew that threatening Warren Beatty with a morality clause was like threatening the ocean with a bucket. Warren Beatty was dangerous to Hollywood for one reason. He didn't want to change the system. He didn't want to reform morality clauses or fight for other actors' freedom. He just wanted to live his life without asking permission, and he had made himself valuable enough that permission became irrelevant. That's more frightening than rebellion, because rebellion fights the system. Irrelevance ignores it. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't give speeches about personal freedom or actors' rights. He didn't lead a movement. He just lived exactly as he wanted to live, publicly, unapologetically, successfully. And the industry adjusted around him like water around stone. The system tried to control him and failed. So it tried to shame him and failed. So it tried to ignore him and couldn't, because he was too profitable, too talented, too valuable. So finally, quietly, without ever admitting it had happened, the system just stopped trying. Warren Beatty never had to defend himself, never had to explain his choices, never had to apologize for being exactly who he was, because real power doesn't defend. Real power doesn't explain. It just exists, and the system adjusts. So here's the question. In an industry built on controlling image, on managing reputation, on making stars apologize for being human, what happens when someone refuses to apologize? Not fights back, not argues, just refuses to acknowledge that anything needs apologizing for. When someone makes the entire concept of scandal irrelevant by never treating it as shameful, If that's the kind of power that interests you, the kind that doesn't defend itself because it doesn't need to, consider subscribing. We explore how control really works. Not the version that lectures you about morality. The version that understands morality clauses only work on people who pretend to follow them.